Well, hey, friends, welcome to Q on Q. It's great to be back with you this week. Last week for us was sure a busy one. I was out of town 3 days attending a great conference on the music industry. I learned a lot about using music in film and TV and other respects. Very, very insightful and a lot that I can take back to the things that I do. But we're back at it this week. And as we step into this final part of the series we've been in, it's helpful to take just a second and look at where we have been these past few episodes. Well, I called this series Context Changes Everything because the way we see our value, our purpose, and even ourselves, it's often shaped less by who we are and more by where we are. When the context shifts, clarity follows, and things that once felt uncertain start to make a lot more sense. We started with the idea that sometimes when we're feeling negative about ourselves, it's not that something is wrong with us, it's that we may be in the wrong room, that environments can shape how your value is seen, and if you're not careful, how you start to see yourself. And then last time, we went a layer deeper and asked a more foundational question: what actually determines your worth? We focused on our uniqueness made in Christ because if that isn't clear, everything else becomes really unstable. And if you've been sitting with that, even just a little, what actually determines your worth, then a new question naturally starts to rise to the surface. If my worth isn't something I earn, if it's not tied to performance or recognition or outcomes, then what does that mean for where I am? How do I make sense of my current situation or my current environment? Because here's the tension: if your value is stable, then your placement has to be understood differently. It can't just be about finding a better situation or chasing something that feels more validating. I have friends that I know that as soon as one little thing goes wrong with the job that they're at, they quit and move to something else. And by the time they're 30, they've had 50 different jobs. It has to become about something deeper, something more intentional than just trying to land in the right spot. And that's where the conversation shifts today. This isn't about constantly searching for the next opportunity or trying to upgrade your circumstances. It's about learning how to understand purpose within placement. Why you might be where you are, what's being shaped in you, and what it looks like to live with clarity, even if your situation hasn't changed. Because the goal isn't to spend your life chasing the right room. The goal is to recognize how to live well in the room you're in while also learning how to tell if and when it's time to move. I know that's a lot to digest. And even further, that kind of clarity often takes time and comes from paying attention, staying grounded, and learning to see your life through a different lens. Well, before we go any further on this topic today, I think it might be helpful for us to go back to that picture that we started with at the beginning of the series. The idea of something as simple as a bottle of water. In one place, it's worth very little. In another, it's priced 10 times higher. But nothing about the water itself actually changed. The value wasn't created in that moment. It was revealed differently depending on where it was placed. I want to say that one more time. The value wasn't created in that moment. It was revealed differently depending on where it was placed. And that's an important reminder because a lot of us carry this quiet pressure to reinvent ourselves in order to feel more valuable. We assume that if something isn't working, the answer must be to become something different, or to fix something, or to add more, or to prove more. But what if the issue isn't that you need to become more valuable? What if it's that what's already in you hasn't been fully seen or fully used in the environment you're in? That doesn't mean every situation needs to change immediately, but it does shift how you interpret what you're experiencing. Instead of assuming something is lagging in you, you can start asking whether your current placement is actually drawing out what's already there. Because placement has a way of either highlighting your strengths or, to be honest, quietly hiding them. And that's the key shift here. Placement reveals value, it doesn't create it. The gifts, the perspective, the capacity you have, it's already there. The question is whether your current context is allowing that to come forward, or whether it's keeping parts of it buried beneath the surface. So the goal isn't to constantly chase becoming something new. It's to understand where what's already in you can be seen and developed and used with purpose. And that takes a different kind of awareness. It moves you away from striving to become and toward learning how to recognize and respond to where you've been placed. This is where things start to feel a little more complicated, if they don't seem complicated enough already. Trust me, I'm the one who has prayed about this in preparation for this series and in my own life, and it's still complicated because not every place is as clear as we want it to be. I feel like, oh, I've had a bad string of days at school. Maybe it's time to move on to something else, or what's next in life, or is it time to retire yet? We tend to assume if something is hard, it must be wrong, or we're in the wrong place. And if it's something that feels easy or comfortable, then it must be the right situation. But let's be honest, real life doesn't usually work that cleanly. There are seasons that are genuinely difficult, not because you're in the wrong place. They're difficult because something in you is being developed. Your patience is being stretched, your perspective being refined. Maybe your character is being shaped in ways that wouldn't happen if everything came easily. And while those seasons can feel frustrating, they often carry a kind of quiet purpose underneath them. At the same time, there are environments that feel good on the surface. They're comfortable, predictable. You know what to expect, and nothing is really being asked of you that feels uncomfortable. But over time, you might start to notice something else: a lack of growth, or a sense that you're coasting, that what you're doing no longer stretches you or challenges you or tries to draw anything new out of you. I've called that for years reaching a plateau. And then you have a decision to make. Should I stay here and coast, or is it time for the what's next? That's the tension. Growth can feel like resistance, and if you're only using your immediate feelings as a guide, it's easy to be misread. You might walk away from something that was actually shaping you, or stay in something that's quietly keeping you stuck. There's a deeper perspective to consider here. Sometimes the work being done in your life isn't about visibility, but it's about depth. There are seasons where what's being built in you matters more than what's being seen from you. And those seasons don't always come with affirmation or clarity. They require trust and patience and a willingness to stay engaged, even when the results aren't that obvious. You see this pattern throughout the way God works in people's lives. Growth often happens in places that feel hidden, repetitive, overlooked. But those are the spaces where roots are formed, where resilience and strength are built before anything is ever brought into the light. So part of discernment is learning to ask a better question than just, is this easy or hard? And instead it becomes, what is this season producing in me? Because the answer to that question will often tell you more about whether you're in the right place than your comfort level ever could. At some point, all this talk and all this consideration becomes less about just talking about it and becomes more about knowing when a place is shaping you in the right ways and when it's time to step into something different. And as you've heard me say before, I wish I could give you a perfect formula that says this is A and this is B. But there are some patterns you can start to recognize if you're paying attention They can really point you in the right direction. There are seasons where staying is the right decision, even if it's not the easiest one. You might be stretched or challenged or even a little uncomfortable, but you can sense that something good is happening underneath it all. Your patience is growing, your perspective is deepening. You're becoming more grounded, even if nobody is noticing it yet. That's often a sign there's still purpose in where you are, even if the recognition hasn't caught up to the growth. And on the other hand, there are situations where something starts to feel off in a different way, not stretched, but diminished. You find yourself pulling back, second guessing more, or feeling like parts of who you are don't quite fit anymore. It's not just that it's hard, it's that it's constantly draining without any sense of development. Over time, that can be a sign that the environment isn't just challenging you, it's shrinking you. In real life, this can look like staying at a job where you're still growing, even if you're not being fully seen yet, or recognizing a role you've held for years no longer aligns with who you've become, even if it once did. Those aren't easy realizations, and they don't come with immediate answers. That's why this process can't be rushed. Discernment takes time. It requires reflection, not reaction. I said there's no magic answer. It means sitting with what you're experiencing long enough and praying about it long enough to understand it instead of making a quick decision just to relieve the tension. At some point, this conversation moves beyond observation, past talking about it, watching and waiting, and into what I like to call faith in action, putting your trust in the decision you are making being the right thing. Why? Because if you believe your worth is not accidental, then it's worth considering that your placement might not be either. Maybe you're destined to be somewhere, not in a rigid, predetermined way, but in a sense that where you are right now can still carry purpose, even if you don't fully understand it all yet. There's a pattern you see over and over again in the way God works. The most visible moments are preceded by long stretches of quiet formation. I've said this before, seasons where nothing seems to be changing on the surface, but something steady is being built underneath. Those seasons can feel easy to dismiss, especially when you're comparing your life to someone else's progress or momentum. But obscurity doesn't mean insignificance. In fact, some of the most important growth happens in places where you won't ever get recognition. That's where consistency is developed, where humility is shaped. This is where faithfulness becomes more than just a nice idea. It becomes a way of living, choosing to be present where you are, choosing to invest in what's in front of you, choosing to do the work with care, even when it feels small or unseen. Not because you're stuck, but because you trust that there's something being built in you that will matter later. And the truth is, not every season will make sense while you're in it. You may not have clarity right away. You might not understand why certain things feel slow or why doors aren't opening. But clarity doesn't always come first. It follows a season of steady faithfulness more often. So the practical question becomes, what does it look like to be faithful here? In your current situation. Not forever. Not with all the answers. Just here. In this season right now. Might look like doing your work with intention instead of checking out. Might look like investing in people instead of waiting for recognition. Or maybe it looks like continuing to grow in ways nobody else sees. Because if your placement has purpose, then your responsibility isn't to force clarity. It's to live faithfully enough to recognize it when it comes. And this is where everything begins to kind of come together in a very practical, personal way, at least for me. If your worth is already established and your placement has purpose, then the way you live doesn't need to be driven by proving. It can be grounded in expressing. That is the shift. Not chasing value, but carrying it with you into whatever space you're in. Because when you start living that way, your environment stops being the thing that defines you. Instead, it becomes the place where what's already in you gets lived out. Man, my classroom every day is a wild place. I teach everything from 10-year-olds to 14-year-olds, from music to video to business. A lot goes on. There's a lot of big personalities. There's a lot of things that could make you question whether you're in the right job some days. There's a lot of things that make me realize I'm right where I'm supposed to be. My classroom's not going to have perfect conditions. I think if I had 20 students in every class that sat and listened and answered with the perfect answers every day, I'd get more bored than I do right now. You don't need perfect conditions to be your best self. You don't need ideal circumstances to show up with integrity, with care, and with intention. Those things aren't dependent on where you are. They come from who you are. So it starts to look like this. You show up fully, even when it's unseen. You do the work in front of you with excellence, not because it'll be noticed, but because it reflects something deeper in you. You stop waiting for the perfect environment to finally be consistent or patient or invested. You choose those things now, right where you are. And man, can that be incredibly freeing? Because it means your life isn't on hold until something changes. You don't have to wait for recognition to do meaningful work. You don't have to wait for the perfect opportunity to start living with purpose. You can invest in people right now, especially those who can't advance you. You can give your best effort in places that don't always give something back. And none of that is wasted when it's coming from a place of grounded value. There's a few simple truths here that I think are really worth holding on to. Things you can come back to when your perspective starts to drift. I don't need to prove my value. I bring it with me. My environment can influence me, but it doesn't define me. I can be faithful here, even if here isn't forever. And what I do matters, but it's not who I am. Because at the end of the day, this becomes an internal posture. You're not showing up to trying to earn something. You're not performing for identity. You're expressing what's already been placed inside you. And when that shift happens, you don't just become more consistent. You become grounded, steady, and aligned, no matter where you are. So as we bring this to a close today, it really comes back to a few honest questions based on those statements that I just shared. Nothing complicated, but things that require you to slow down and actually pay attention. You have to ask yourself, am I trying to prove my value, or am I learning to live from it? Because those two ways of living will take you in very different directions. And right alongside that, it's worth asking, is this place shaping me or shrinking me? Not just, is it comfortable or is it hard, but what is it actually producing in you? Are you becoming more patient, more aligned, more grounded? Or do you find yourself pulling back, feeling less like yourself the longer you stay? And what about the quiet question underneath it all? What would it look like to just trust where I am right now? Not with all the answers, not forever, just in this season. To trust there may be purpose here, even if it's not fully clear yet. To stay present enough to recognize what's being developed instead of constantly trying to escape what feels uncertain. So here's something simple and practical I want you to carry with you this week. Pay attention. Pay attention to the people around you, the things around you, the experiences around you. I want you to notice the moments you feel steady or engaged, like you're showing up as yourself. Then I want you to notice when things feel off, where you clearly feel disconnected, diminished, or out of step. Don't rush to fix it. Just pay attention. Start to see it clearly. You have to recognize it first before you can do something about it. Because you don't have to have everything figured out to move forward in a meaningful way. You don't need perfect clarity to take the next step. You just need to be faithful where you are while you're figuring it out. And sometimes that kind of steady, grounded faithfulness is exactly what leads you to where you're meant to be next. Well, friends, I appreciate you joining me for this journey. This has been a very meaningful series for me to put together and has caused me to do a lot of reflection in life. I hope that it has done the same for you. Well, that's all we have for this episode of Q on Q, and we wrap up our Context Changes Everything series. As always, I really do appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you back here next time, and we'll have more for you on Q.